Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Adrienne, and I'm a communications strategist at Guardian, a strategic communications agency that serves faith-driven leaders and organizations. With me today, we have Rob, Guardian's president, and Jennifer, another communication strategist and our senior event producer. We're going to be having a conversation today about one of Guardian's more interesting and unique areas of expertise, which is our legacy planning for leaders of faith. And by that, what we really mean by that is what an organization says and does in the wake of their leader's death. Our team members have more than 20 years of experience with this kind of work. We've been involved in, I think, 10 legacy projects for faith leaders, most notably Chick-fil-A founder Truett Cathy and world-renowned evangelist Billy Graham. So let's kick off the conversation today. Rob, I want to ask you, what do you think of when we talk about legacy planning and leader legacy planning? Who needs it? What are we talking about today?
Yes. Well, first, Adrienne, thanks for hosting the conversation. Jennifer, thanks for joining me on this. It's an important conversation to have, not always the easiest topic, and we'll get into that. But when we think about legacy planning, I'll frame it this way. Everybody is familiar with the process of writing a will or buying life insurance or conducting some estate planning. So that's something very familiar to us that everybody does. When we think about leaders, we feel like they have a much greater responsibility. They have an organization and staff to think about. They often have constituents or followers or readers to think about as well. And so, and then I'll note they also have a public legacy to think about. And so we want to come in and help the organization and the leader prepare for this special moment, prepare the organization and thinking about its future viability without that leader, but also thinking about the leader, their family, their followers, their legacy, the story that's going to be told. So that's how we think about leader legacy planning. As far as who needs it, if you're leading an organization, you need it. And so that could be a church, that could be, a large parachurch ministry, that could be a school. Also, we note, influential public figures, so artists, musicians, folks like that. If there's going to be public interest at any level in your passing, then you need some level of planning to prepare for that. And certainly, again, if you've got an organization and staff, you need to be thinking about them and the organization, when you pass and what happens to them.
Right. Yeah, that's great, Rob. Let's talk about planning. When you think about this specific type of planning, what should it involve? Or are we really just talking about a memorial service, or kind of walk us through what it really involves, Rob?
Yeah, it's a great question. And something I meant to note is, it is more than a memorial service. And that's the thing that we all think about when we think about death. But for a leader or a notable figure, it's so much more about the bigger picture is what are we communicating? How are we communicating? And that can be and probably should be through an event, but there's a lot else involved. And so for a leader, for instance, there's a lot of levels of communication. There's a lot of different groups that need to hear perhaps slightly different things during this time period. So thinking through that in advance, for a leader or notable figure, they're going to have a lot of people that want to mourn their passing or celebrate their life. And so what are the venues and the opportunities to do that, whether it's a physical event or something online? So thinking about caring for those different groups of people. As I mentioned, there's a public narrative, legacy, reputation to think about, and how do we want that shaped, what we want the final word to be, so to speak, on that during this time. And then again, just thinking about the organization they're leaving behind and the staff, and how do we prepare that organization in advance for the day when they don't have that leader.
Yeah, and I would jump in and say that because this is such a larger scope than the average individual, it requires a lot more planning that's ideally done years in advance. And there's no way to overstate the importance of starting early and being able to plan this in advance.
Yeah, I mean, I think the advanced part of it, let's talk about that for a second. I think some people might be watching or listening thinking, oh, this sounds like a great idea, but I've got time, I'm healthy, or my organization's leader is healthy. We'll think about this way down the road. So why is advanced planning so helpful, especially when it comes to a moment like this? Is there ever a too soon, Jennifer? What do you think? When is a good time for an organization to be really considering this?
Yeah, well, I think like Rob's examples of life insurance and estate planning, it's just never too early to start. From a communication standpoint, we've touched on this, but it's this moment when a leader dies is a crucial storytelling moment. There's a public narrative that needs to be communicated. And so because this is a once in a lifetime moment, we want to be able to steward it wisely. And that comes with being able to start early and making decisions.
Yeah, and I think before we get too far into the conversation, we should probably just address even more of the elephant in the room of how this is such a tough topic. You know, nobody really wants to think about death. It's not really easy to discuss. So why is it important to dive into early, even when it's uncomfortable? Rob, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a really difficult topic. We understand that. For people of faith, it is different. It's a different story, but it's still difficult, and we recognize that. And so we understand there's some reticence even to get started. But here's what we'd say, and we think about this again in kind of two channels. One, for the leader themselves. This is an opportunity, particularly for faith leaders, to point people to Christ. You're going to have that spotlight, like Jennifer mentioned, on your organization, on this leader. And so for faith leaders, that's obviously a big part of their story and their life. So opportunity to point people to Christ. It's an opportunity to celebrate that leader's life and legacy. We know faith leaders, in general, are seeking to be humble, but people want to celebrate you. People want to be, have some closure to that story. And then it just cares for the family and staff. It's a hard time. It's a time of mourning. So if we can get a lot of those decisions made in advance, it gives more room and space for family and staff to mourn and grieve during that time. The other channel we think about is the organization. And so what's that going to look like past the leader's death? Starting in advance helps the organization tackle these nuanced decisions that we know take time in terms of continuity planning and transition planning. What happens next? It helps them, or gives them time to create a roadmap for that. And again, we've just seen that these decisions need space. They need room. And so to start, years in advance allows those to be done thoughtfully. And then finally, again, just prepares the organization for the day without that leader. And in particular, it gives us time to work on a strategy to help the organization imbue their constituents with new vision, with confidence in their organization post that leader. So that's really about the communication piece of it.
Yeah, that's great. I think, in our experience, it feels like planning ultimately ends up being such a gift to the family and to the staff.
That's right.
Like you just said, there's so many choices, if it's so stressful, honestly, and it's okay that it's a naturally stressful time. So if you can plan now or plan early, the idea would be that then you don't have to rush important decisions then. Jennifer, do you want to tell us more about, really why it's such a gift to plan in advance, and really why that's important, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, Rob touched on it a lot with some of the decisions that have to be made. There's so many decisions that you don't want to rush, but the gift is so important, and it really only can be given if we start ahead of time and plan ahead of time. And part of the big part of that we help come alongside you and work on is developing those communication systems, the plans of what story you want to tell, what you want to make sure the public is aware of that happened in this leader's life or in the life of the organization, and how the organization will continue after the leader is no longer on this earth. So developing those communications, the scripts and things that are going to tell that story, and then effectively and efficiently being able to manage that flow of information. So that's where planning comes in very importantly, as just being able to get that flow of information out quickly and efficiently and let people know what it is you want to tell them.
Yeah, I'd say, again, we've talked about the spotlight moment. And so you want to be ready. An organization's brand needs to be ready. Now, of course, in so many scenarios, you don't know exactly when this is going to come, which just means you need to have a constant state of readiness. Of course, this helps your brand and storytelling in general. But we think about a brand needs to be ready. Everything they're doing now, and certainly around the death of a leader is a deposit or withdrawal from their brand bank, so to speak, and even from the leader's legacy. So all these communication and brand decisions you're making can affect this moment and the spotlight that'll be on you. And so what that means is everything matters. And so, that covers so much. It could be the photo with the obituary. It could be who's chosen to give eulogies. It could be the venue. It could be social media posts. It could be the timing of other ministry initiatives. So there's obviously a really long list, but everything matters when thinking through this lens. And we have the questions and a lot of experience to help you think through all those different aspects.
Yeah, that's great. I think you both have touched on this, and I want to dive in a little bit more to the idea of the storytelling. I love that component of this. It's such a big piece of this that we focus on too. And a practical example of that, I think that we can, that comes to mind is Billy Graham. And when his funeral took place, it happened under this large, huge tent outdoors. And if you're familiar with the history, you know that he was known for these evangelistic campaigns, or what was deemed crusades, that first took place in Los Angeles under a giant tent. And so the big story around his funeral and what people were referencing was that it was his final crusade. And a big reason that this story even occurred was because we helped remind people of that first event in Los Angeles, of the connection with the tent. And, if we hadn't done that, a lot of people really wouldn't have necessarily made that connection naturally themselves. So it helped us learn. And I think that a big piece of this we bring into every project like this is that if you do have a story you want to tell, or if you have information you want people to know, you really have to equip people with that info. You can't just assume that, the story is going to tell itself, because most stories don't. So let's switch gears to just, a little bit, like we've talked a lot about some high level kind of philosophies and principles. And, I want to bring it down really practical, because I feel like this can feel really daunting to a lot of people. So if you're thinking, where do we start? What would you say to that? Jennifer, could you tell us, give us insight into how we would tackle this kind of work?
Sure. Well, the first thing we do is start asking questions. Questions like, what are your goals and what's important to you? And then once we have some of those answers, we're able to help walk you through different areas. This is different for every leader, but typically they fall into these kinds of categories of family decisions. So obviously that's self-explanatory, but it's really vital to knowing the family's preferences and being able to incorporate that into the planning. Then we'd say some things fall under project framework. So that would be things like a guide that helps you get organized and figure out kind of the administrative and organizational tasks or needs. And then from that, creating an actual activation plan that gives the step-by-step process of how these things, all these planning things are going to be implemented at the time. And that kind of moves us into the communications element, which would include the scripts that are customized for all those audiences that we've mentioned, whatever's relevant for that leader and that organization, determining any media materials that might be necessary to help tell the story. Everyone probably needs an obituary, but what else is needed? Helping you select visuals, helping that can be used online for sharing in social media or telling stories through other online properties. And then having a web property that lets you, gives people a way to give a tribute to the leader. So they can either just find out the information of all the memorial events that might be happening, or they can actually submit their memory or something special that impacted them in the life of the leader and then the ministry itself. And then, of course, even though all this legacy planning is more than just event planning, there is the event logistics component. And that can be anything from the big picture stuff that's dealing with vendors and venue relationships, or down to the tiny details and personal touches, like making sure the family has something to eat and that there are tissues available in the service so that they have them readily available.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So what's an ideal time frame though for this type of planning? What would be a good amount of time to carve out for a plan like this?
Yeah, it's a big range. We would say 3 months to 3 years. that all depends on who the leader is, how notable they are, maybe how many organizations they have, how complex the situation is. Additional organizations can make it more complex, and other factors. So we've given this wide range. We've also built out 5 different tiers of service to meet folks where they are, on this range. The earlier the planning starts, the longer it takes. And obviously, if the leader keeps living, which we hope for, that can extend the length of the project. Though I'll say the goal is, let's get that book on the shelf, so to speak. Let's get the plan developed, and then we can revisit that at appropriate increments to make sure it's updated if the leader lives a long time. So rather be prepared and get it done early than wait. So again, we have these 5 tiers. They cover just the essentials to really highly customized multi-year plans. Some could take more than 3 years, again, if the leader lives a long time. But months to years is a good range to think about it, and it just depends on the complexity and what you want done.
That's great. That's so helpful. Okay, so I feel like now we've covered some basics, and I want to switch gears again and have us answer some submitted questions. So Jennifer, I'm going to start with
Great.
you. Our first question. Okay, here it is. Is a legacy project necessary for a leader who is not widely known and would not likely attract much media attention?
Well, I would say yes, because we've touched on it already, but legacy planning is much more than just communicating with news media. So we're trying to tell the story to your audiences, focusing on how you communicate that story and what you want to communicate to them. So yes, regardless of whether there would be public news media interest in the leader's death, then I think that this is an important thing for any leader to be able to plan for.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point you bring up, because I think, this really is going to be unique for each leader. It's really about communicating to your community, whatever that means. So, yeah, that's great. Let's go to the next question. Jennifer, I'll stick with you. Rob, we'll get to you in a second. Here's another one. If we don't know what we're going to want to do when the time comes, we don't know the answers to every question, can we still get started?
Oh, yes, please. I think getting started is often the hardest part. So you don't have to know all the answers. If you can give us just a few answers or even inclinations for the answers, we can help then guide you and help figure out the best way to equip you for the future and the rest of the decisions that need to be made.
That's great. Okay, so this is an interesting question, Rob. I'll ask you this one. It's probably one that a lot of people listening are curious about. How does the project approach differ for a current leader versus a former leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, each situation's unique, obviously, and we've seen so many different dynamics. So we've got, a great amount of experience in these different situations. But it depends on the leader, how involved in the organization they are, whether they're the founder or not, are they still there? 2 quick examples. You may have an older leader who's still involved, has been there a long time. Well, that would warrant a lot more planning than perhaps a younger leader who hasn't been there as long or is behind the scenes. Another example would be a former leader who's retired, but had a meaningful impact during a season. Well, we think that still warrants legacy planning, but perhaps not at the same level. So it may be more of a minimal plan. And then there's all scenarios in between. So we've seen a lot, and we can help figure out what's best for the organization.
Good. That's good. All right, Rob, I'm going to stick with you for this one. As a team's considering getting started on one of these projects, what is the one thing you wish they knew?
Gosh, there's a lot. I think what it comes down to is get started. It never feels like it's a good time to start this, with the exception of maybe your leader's sick and in the hospital, and then it's a rush. And while we have helped in those scenarios, it's less than ideal. So, folks buy life insurance in their 20s, or do estate planning well in advance of old age. So get started now. Now is the right time. and just start chipping away at this and don't put it off. We've again seen a lot of those scenarios, but we've seen a lot of organizations and leaders, thankfully, get started on this when they're young and healthy, and it gives plenty of time to think through all the nuances of these situations.
All right, this next question builds on something we've touched on a little bit, but I love it. So here we go. This is an uncomfortable topic. How do you recommend approaching it with a leader, or do you ever plan without the leader's knowledge? Do either of you have any?
Yeah, this is a good one. I have some thoughts, so I'm happy to jump in on this. You know, it is an uncomfortable topic. We've talked about that. Again, I go back to these two tracks or two channels. There's the organization, and I think that regardless of, or almost regardless, not to be disrespectful, but almost regardless of the leader, the executives of the organization have a fiduciary responsibility to think about continuity planning and the future of their organization. And so they should be thinking about what's next should their leader pass. I think most, responsible organizations are doing that or should be doing that. Then there's the leader track, which involves family and what their legacy is going to be. How do they want to be celebrated or memorialized? Ideally, those things happen together, or at least at some point are woven in for a cohesive plan. But I think they can operate separately. Again, ideally, it's together. But if the organization wants to plug away on some stuff, and then the leader and the family want to separately, that's fine. And we've seen that happen. As far as who approaches the leader for this very delicate conversation, it's based on relationships. So I think you'll know in your gut. Could be the CEO or president, could be a chief of staff, could be somebody else. I think it's who has that, intimate relationship with the leader where this could be an appropriate topic to bring up. And as far as bringing it up, again, we think about it like estate planning. So it's the same thing, just preparing for the future. Wisdom's obviously a really big deal in the faith space, thankfully. And this is a wise thing. Wise people prepare ahead of time. And so just like the average Joe or Jane prepares with a will and life insurance, it's the same process, but just at a greater level. So that's how we think about it.
I love that. Yes, it's very wise. Okay. All right. So let's just take one last question. I'd like to hear from both of you on this one, though. In your experience, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to legacy planning?
Ooh. Well, I can jump in. I think it's probably helping those who are closest to the leader, and that could be family members or a staff member who's worked there a long time, but helping those people kind of maintain that balance between their personal feelings about the leader and planning for the death of the leader, and then having to make some practical decisions. So that's a real challenge, and it's something that's ongoing, and you have to continually help yourself and help each other get into that proper mental space so that you can be able to address all these questions and decisions.
Yeah, great. Thanks for handling that first, Jennifer. I would say, I think, family and leadership buy-in that's then followed by action. It is hard to get started, but sometimes once you get started, kind of sign on the dotted line to begin the process, it can then stall. It gets pushed to the back burner because there's other pressing things. And this seems like a day far in the future. And again, we understand that. But what we'd say is just chip away at it. You will be pleasantly surprised after 6 months or a year how much progress you've made. So once you get started, once you're ready to take this on, just keep a routine schedule of check-ins or meetings or work blocks for it, and you really can make a lot of progress in a short amount of time. But it does take that consistent attention to it, even when other things are pressing in.
Great. Where can people get started today? What's next?
Yeah, the best place is just or the best way is to reach out to us. So, reach out to us, inquiries@guardian.agency. And, we understand there's so many factors, there's so many questions, there's so many elements. We've done a lot of these, and so we've seen a lot and can help you navigate, what's best, what level. Again, we have 5 tiers of service. So what tier would be most appropriate for you, where to start, when to start, and get you on that path. So reach out to us and we can help you determine the opportunity ahead.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. And thank you for joining us for today's conversation. Again, you can learn more about legacy planning with Guardian at guardian.agency. Thanks, y'all. See you soon.
Great. Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Jennifer.